Hey everybody, this is Fred Richani of thesportscourier.com, youtube.com/thesportscourier. And over the years, we've had the pleasure of interviewing some of the biggest names in professional wrestling history. And our very first professional wrestling interview took place in December 2009 with a gentleman you may know by the name of Booker T Huffman, WWE Hall of Famer, class of 2013, and the current SmackDown General Manager. Check it out. So, Booker, the first question I'll ask you is, did you grow up a wrestling fan?
Pretty much all my life. Since I was a kid, probably Houston wrestling was real popular here in Houston. Bosch was the promoter, former wrestler as well. I watched it as a kid. It wasn't one of those things where, like most kids who, grew up to be professional wrestlers, something that they dream about, their whole lives. I never dreamt or thought about being a wrestler or anything like that. But I did used to watch it, all the time on Saturday mornings. Used to be live on Friday nights, but they would air it on Saturday night, actually, and then again on Sunday morning. So you catch the same program again, So I was a big fan. JYD was probably my favorite wrestler.
And what made you pursue a career in professional wrestling?
Well, it wasn't a decision that I wanted to be a wrestler or anything like that. It was just an avenue, it was something actually my brother wanted to do. I never, like I say, thought about being a wrestler until I actually, went to the wrestling school in 1990. Ivan Putski opened the wrestling school here in Houston, and it was a 8-week course, and I went, it was $3,000. But I felt like it was something, I was meant to do.
So it was your brother Stevie Ray that pushed you towards going into pro wrestling?
Something that I wouldn't necessarily say he pushed me, but, it's something, we used to act like, wrestlers when we were young kids. But, like I said, never thinking about being a wrestler. Maybe, he thought about it, growing up a lot more than I did because he used to go to, Samuel Coliseum and watch wrestling a whole lot more than I did. It was something that he, started as far as, working out and bodybuilding, himself, big, but I never really thought about it like that.
You had one hell of a rough road at first before you even got into professional wrestling. How did you get through your trials and tribulations?
I don't know. I guess just, believing in myself, knowing that I didn't want to be one of the kids, still on the corner, 20 years later, drinking a 40, never seeing what life is really all about. I always felt like I was going to be one of those kids who wanted to go and see the world and do something, just didn't know exactly what it was. But, just believing in faith, having some good people that believed in me as well. After I got in a lot of trouble when I was a kid, actually, going to prison at age 20, and then coming out, and some, people believed in me and not just, categorized me as someone who was a bad kid, having someone believe in you, kind of like, give you a whole lot of motivation.
How did you end up getting your first big break in wrestling?
It was, me and my brother, we went to a show up in Amarillo, Texas, it was an ice storm, and it took us probably 18 hours to get there from Houston, just because the weather was so bad, and, met Skandar Akbar, and, Skandar Akbar, he ran a promotion down in Dallas called the, GWF, the Global Wrestling Federation, and, saw me work, and he was like, man, maybe I can get you guys to come down and work for me one day, and, that was kind of like the beginning, going to the Global Wrestling Federation and working there for 2 years, being seen on television, on ESPN Monday through Friday. It was kind of like, we didn't get paid a lot of money, but just being on television was worth its weight in gold, as far as being seen on a worldwide stage, weekly, and, that was the beginning, before WCW.
You had a ton of success in WCW. Your career year in WCW was in 2000 when you won the world title multiple times. You won it the first time at Bash of the Beach 2000 in the midst of that whole Vince Russo, Jeff Jarrett, Hulk Hogan controversy. When did you find out you were getting the title that night?
Actually, I didn't know until maybe I knew I was scheduled to wrestle for the title, but it was a lot of chaos that day.
I can imagine.
That went on. Backstage. promoters, Hulk Hogan, and whatnot. And so it was actually, I didn't know I was going to wrestle for it until about 10 minutes before I actually wrestled for it.
As chaotic as it was that night, how satisfying was it to finally accomplish your dream?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a dream or anything like that. I never really wrestled, to win titles or anything like that. I always, felt like the best wrestlers, titles just come, with being a pretty good wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
Fulfilling the goal, though, of becoming champion was great, because it was something that I never thought, would ever happen, being in, that company for so many years. That just not a thought that ever went through my head, winning the WCW championship. But when it happened, it was a great moment, not just for myself, but for a lot of people that watch me, a lot of people that look up to me, a lot of, minorities to see that, if Booker T can do it, they could do it too.
Did you enjoy singles competition more or being a tag team with your brother Stevie Ray as Harlem Heat?
Well, both of them was gratifying. Both of them had different aspects. Being a tag team wrestler with my brother was really good. Being able to go down the road with somebody that you could trust, watch your back. Because the wrestling business is a cutthroat business. They could stab you in the back in a heartbeat. And you ain't got somebody to watch your back. It could be pretty cold. And then there's the success my brother and I had. Being tag team champions 10 times. And then, coming from the Global Wrestling Federation, winning the title there as well, it was a lot of great moments as far as my tag team career go. But singles wrestling was just as gratifying, to be able to go out and have great matches, the best of 7 with Chris Benoit, and then, to go on and win so many more titles. Those moments was just as gratifying, but I really don't put one over the other one. Both of them. That's just like asking, if I like Edo or Babyface. Both of them, you get just different gratification.
Were the politics in WCW as bad as everybody says, or were they overblown?
Well, politics is going to be everywhere, but myself, I never really played the politics, the game or anything like that. I always let my talent speak for itself. I just went out and worked, above and beyond the rest of the guys. Politics come into play, when it's for a job security go, but I've always felt if you was talented, you never really had to worry about, job security or anything like that, so I just always went out and, performed at the highest level and let everything else play itself out. I just never got off into the politics.
Thoughts on your great WWE run? Now, you had a lot of success, but some people have said that you could have accomplished even more if it wasn't for politics and things like that. What do you think went right and what went wrong?
I don't think anything went wrong. Actually, I had a great WWE run. It was a long run. It was 7 years straight of wrestling on a regular basis. Without any breaks, and that could be really, really hard on you as far as your body goes. It could tax you out. It could really break you if you're not mentally prepared. That's why a lot of guys from WCW didn't make it because they wasn't mentally prepared. Physically, they may have been prepared, but just mentally, it could break your spirit. It could break you down, chew you up, spit you out. So. Had a lot of great moments in WWE, becoming, the champion of champions, winning the title, winning the King of the Ring, I had a lot of great moments being with Gold Dust, some of my greatest moments, my Stone Cold Steve Austin, episodes, I had a lot of great moments in WWE. I don't say there was anything bad about it at all. It was a good run.
You won the world title as King Booker back in 2006. But 3 years before that, at WrestleMania 19, you faced Triple H, and a lot of people were surprised that they didn't give you the gold back then. Do you feel like WWE waited too long to give you the world title?
Well, a lot of people ask that question, if I should have won it, at that WrestleMania with Triple H. But I always say, everything happens for a reason. I was totally cool with going out there, putting Triple H over, but more importantly, I just wanted to go out and have the best match on the card. Mm-hmm. I really think we did that night. We went out and put out a lot of effort. And me, I walked away without the title that night, but I title. It was perfect timing for me. Maybe I should have won, who knows? But when I won it, it was perfect timing. Like I say, coming off the champion of champions match, winning that, and then becoming, the king, winning the King of the Ring, and then becoming king, and then becoming champion. Everything played itself out, which puts me in a category which no other wrestler has accomplished, So, and even now, after it's all over with, people is going to remember that more than anything, as far as winning the title goes, So I think when I won it, it was perfect timing. Should I have won it earlier? It's really not up to me to say.
Which brand did you prefer wrestling for more, Raw or SmackDown?
I had a lot better time when I was on SmackDown. There was a lot more relaxed. There was a lot more, you make a few more mistakes that you couldn't make on Raw. Raw was one of those companies where you got to be totally on your game each and every week, mistake-free. But SmackDown was a little bit more relaxed. The guys backstage was a lot more relaxed. Less tension. So I like working on SmackDown when I was there.
After WWE, you had a nice little run in TNA for a couple years. Why did it end so abruptly?
Well, I feel like, I've been at TNA for 2 years, and I really only had 3 angles. I was doing the Maryland Mafia thing. I'm really not a behind-the-scenes player. I'm a front runner. I like being out in the middle of the ring doing my thing. I never really got a chance to work. The guys that I really wanted to work on, guys like Kurt Angle, guys like Sting, I wanted to be right in the middle of the picture, for 2 years, sitting back, waiting, got a little frustrated, and I just thought it was time for me to, to move on, but company was good to me. I just didn't like the writing. After, Jeff Jarrett had, left, and then Dutch Mantell was let go, they really had no wrestling minds in the office writing the show, and the show was being written from a writer's perspective. I just thought that was a big mistake, and I just didn't want, my career to go down the tubes and my legacy to be, ended up with a writer's pen, dictating the way, my career should go. Well, once Jeff left, it became a whole lot different. Mm-hmm. Because, like I say, Dutch was let go. There's no real focus as far as what the wrestlers needed. It was just seemed like it was just focused on what the writers was writing, mm-hmm. and the wrestlers had to go out and do it. And I just didn't feel like that was a formula that was going to, make the company bigger and better. Now with folk coming in, saying that the writers are going to be fired, he's taking over and whatnot. Maybe it could get a lot better, but I really think the way success should be between the writers and the wrestlers working in conjunction together to create a show, and I think that's what was missing, and I think that's what they're probably going to need a lot more of.
You spoke in a number of different accents during your TNA run, with my personal favorite being Wolfman Jack. What's up with all those accents?
Well, those fight Wolfman Jack, he was part Wolfman Jack, part, somebody else, But my thing is, I'm a performer, I'm an entertainer. I don't just wrestle, I don't just go out to entertain for the wrestling fan. I want to go to, LA and do movies. I want people to see my range as far as some things that I can do. I'm just not one. I don't want to be typecast as just a wrestler. Mm-hmm. I want to be seen as an entertainer, someone who go out to entertain from the wrestling world as well as the on-screen world. So when I'm out there doing it, I'm hoping some director, some producer, someone in the screen actor field is looking at it. Yeah. Hopefully they'll see something that they can use and bring me in to do something else.
And what did you enjoy playing more, as the Can You Dig It Sucka guy or King Booker with the Royal Court?
Well, both of Booker T is like a self-contained guy. He's self-contained. He's not man-made. He's from the street. He's of the people. King Booker was royalty. He was Camelot. It was like Barney. I had a chance to go out and act and be something totally different. You know, you see me with a British accent, you see me with a Jamaican accent, an African accent, you know. Like you say, the Wolfman Jack accent, you know. So my thing is just about playing a role. I like being a role player. I like going out, you know, making people, you know, I just like going out and entertaining the people in whatever aspect it may be. You know, the team was great. You know, a lot of people hated it. A lot of kids loved it. You know, because like I said, they saw a cartoon come alive right before them. You know, in human form. You know, so it was a great run. You know, King Booker could have ran for a whole lot longer. You know, but you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, I think.
Was your partnership with Goldust the weirdest, kookiest thing you ever did in wrestling, or does nothing top your epic supermarket brawl with Stone Cold Steve Austin?
Well, actually, you know, I think the Goldust stuff tops that. You know, Goldust and I was two guys that never thought would, you know, become as popular, you know, as we did. You know, Goldust and Booker T, you know, was just one character totally mixed with another character, and they both was totally different, you know, than each other. But we made it work, you know, and that was the challenging part, you know, for myself, was to be able to go out and do something like that on a weekly basis, but make it work, you know, where people actually love the entertainment value that we were giving them, you know. And in the end, you know, when Goldust and Booker T broke up, you know, the fans actually, a lot of them actually cried, you know, because they didn't want to see Booker T and Goldust break up, you know. So we fulfilled, you know, what we were trying to do, and that was just go out, you know, create and entertain the fans, you know, with what little that we had, you know. And I think a lot of it, him and I actually pulled it off, you know, just, you know, on each other's character, and being able to go out and, you know, make fun of ourselves, you know. So I think the Goldust and Booker T tops the Stone Cold Steve Austin stuff by far.
Is there anybody in WWE that you never got to wrestle that you look back, you know, now in your career and say, damn, man, I wish we locked horns at least once?
Only person I haven't wrestled really that I really want to wrestle was Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, I feel like is a great talent. I feel like, you know, he's, you know, one of the greatest of all time as far as storytelling goes, making the fans really buy into what he does. He's not one of those guys that just fly all over the place, but he actually, you know, brings a whole lot of drama into the ring. And by the end of it, you know, in the beginning of it, the fans really not sure what they're watching, but by the end of it, you know, all of them on the edge of their seats, you know, wanted to see a whole lot more, you know. So I feel like Shawn Michaels, you know, perhaps, you know, one of the greatest, if not the greatest talent, you know, that ever put on a pair of boots. You know, he's the one guy that I didn't get the chance to, you know, mix up with.
Obviously, your story is very inspirational, but I'm wondering, who inspires you in and out of the ring to continue to do what you do?
You know, in the ring, I don't have a whole lot of, you know, inspirational guys that I really looked up to, and from that form, you know, Undertaker is a really good friend. He's one of the guys that took me in, you know, when I first got to WWE. So he's a guy who I respect, you know, to the utmost. Out of the ring, Muhammad Ali has always been my greatest inspiration. You know, a guy who defied all the odds. You know, he would try to bring him down. People said what they wanted to say about him, you know, but when they saw him lit the torch, you know, the Olympics, you know, a lot of people cried, you know, and, you know, thought a whole lot different about him, you know. So Muhammad Ali probably is my greatest, you know, person that I have in mind.
Booker, at the time this interview is being recorded, Elijah Burke recently made some comments kind of insinuating that WWE did not have enough African-American wrestlers. Just as one of the biggest African-American stars in professional wrestling history, I just wanted your take on what he was saying, and why do you think there's a lack of African-American talent in pro wrestling today?
Well, you know, that question has been asked to me several times, you know. Well, one thing, the way I always looked at it, is when I came up, you know, in the neighborhood, wrestling wasn't our way out. You know, it was always football, always basketball. It was always, you know, selling drugs or something like that. You know, so we just never really tend to gravitate towards wrestling. That's why there isn't, I think, an abundance of black wrestlers in the wrestling business. I have a wrestling school, and I have one black say that, you know what I mean? As far as WWE, perhaps them pushing, one black wrestler at a time. Maybe there's only one black wrestler good enough to be pushed at that time. So I really don't, fault the company for there's not, for it not being a lot of black wrestlers in the business and a lot of black wrestlers that's good enough to go out there and perform.
Who was your favorite opponent in your career, and who was your least favorite, as in a guy that you looked at, on the bout sheet before the match and said, "Oh boy, this might be a bit of a rough day in the office"?
I say my favorite opponent, of course, was Chris Benoit. Because we beat each other up. We had great matches together. My least opponent, favorite opponent to wrestle was probably Finley. Not that he's not a good wrestler or anything like that, but Finley's one of those guys who's a brawler. You may have a plan to go one way, and he'll go out there and change it totally up on you. So as you get kicked in the back as hard as you can. So those probably be the two guys. But like I say, both of them are great wrestlers.
Despite leaving WWE abruptly, is the door still open for you to return there eventually?
Perhaps. It's something that we've talked about. One thing, I know I don't want to work, 180 days a year anymore, and working at that pace anymore, but I'm sure there's some avenue, perhaps for me. I've never burned bridges or anything like that, or really made waves, even though when I left other stuff on the internet, about me, as far as me having a bad attitude and whatnot, but I'm sure if you ask the wrestlers, none of those guys would say that.
Speaking as a longtime WCW fan, is there any chance of a Harlem Heat reunion, or is Stevie Ray pretty much retired?
My brother's retired right now, he stopped in 2000, but one thing I always say is never say never. Right now I'm just freelancing, and working, at my pace, taking bookings from that aspect. But I never say never. That's just something I never will do.
You did a little bit of commentary during your feud with Benoit in 2006, and of course you had some funny moments as a commentator in TNA as well. Could we see you back in WWE as a color commentator?
Well, definitely. I'm sure if I do go back to WWE, it'll probably be from commentary perspective. Just because, like I said, I know I don't want to work those days again. I know in TNA, when I was doing Black Snow, I had a lot of good reviews. People actually want to see more and more Black Snow. So definitely. My thing is, like I say, I know what I want it more important than anything. I got to feel good about being where I'm at. One thing about me, I've never been fired. Since I've been in this business, just to the fact that I always go out and do my job. Definitely, you can see me back in some perspectives.
Who are some of your favorite wrestlers to watch, and who do you think is right now the best in the business? It's hard to say, who's the best one. I've seen a lot of great matches from a lot of great guys. I look at, guys, kids like AJ Styles, who's actually, one of the guys who I enjoy working with. I enjoy it, and helping him perfect his wrestling game and bring it up to another level. And, I've seen him have great matches with a lot of guys. And then you got, Samoa Joe, who's a good friend of mine. He's a guy I do actually enjoy watching when he's on top of his game, when they're letting him go out and do what he does best. And that's just beat somebody up. But it's hard to say, who is that one guy who I really like watching right now at this stage of the game, because actually I don't watch a whole lot of it. I'm always thinking about, my school, my students, who's going to be the next, Booker T, who's going to be the next superstar, so really don't watch a whole lot of it. You, of course, have a wrestling school and a promotion, Reality of Wrestling. What's the one most important message you really try to preach to all of your students?
I always tell them that you can't make it in the locker room, you can't make it in the ring. Very, very simple, You can be one of the greatest, up and comers, but if you got a bad attitude, if you don't know what the loyalty, the respect, of the business really, really, truly means, you're not going to be very well accepted. So you got to really know how to make it in the locker room before you can actually make it in the ring.
You and your wife do quite a bit of charity work and motivational speaking through the Booker T Fight for Kids Foundation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's just all about, keeping kids on the right track, going in the schools, talking to the students, letting them know that a lot of wrestling kids, wrestling fans, young kids, they see Booker T, but they really never know the Booker T story, so I go in and make sure I tell them the Booker T story as far as, the trouble that I got into, I don't sugarcoat it or anything like that. Coming from a single parent household, my mother passed when I was really young. Like I say, I'm getting into trouble with the law, but you can still, come out of that. But more importantly, I just try to teach them about education and what education, really, really means. I always make sure to, let them know, to watch the news, and see what's happening out there in the world. See what it really happened to you without you really, really knowing it. Like I say myself, I got in trouble one time in my life, and I ended up, going to prison for it. And I could have got, from 5 years to 99 years in prison. It was the first time I ever made a mistake in my life. And, I just make sure that they're wise, wise enough to know better, and actually to, inquire, open their eyes a whole lot more, and then, taking kids in, into my school, and showing them a different way, sometimes they don't have money, we still take them in and, teach them how to be young men and young ladies, so it's just really about a life situation more than anything.
Well, Booker T, you are certainly an inspiration in and out of the ring. Thank you so much for the time. Fans, do not forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can find Booker T online on Twitter, twitter.com/Booker T5X. That's right, follow him at Booker T5X. Until next time, can you dig that? Suckers.